Ja'Marr Chase and George Kittle are primed to go berserk this weekend. We discuss our wide receiver and tight end rankings for week 3 of the fantasy season on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win. Now, we got into our running back and quarterback rankings on yesterday's show, so it's time to hit on our wide receiver and tight end rankings. We have some injuries out there that are affecting these rankings, right? And then we also have some really nice matchups for these top guys with Amon-Ra St. Brown going against the Cardinals. I have him as my number 1 guy. You have him at 2. But the real guy I want to talk about here is Ja'Marr Chase, who he needs to have a huge game. Has not happened yet. He was drafted as a top 5 fantasy pick. You have him as your number 1 guy. I have him right now ranked at 3, but I think I'm going to move him to 2. Talk about him against the Commanders this week, Vinny, and why we think he's going to have a huge game.
Yeah, the Commanders' secondary is not very good. They proved that in the first 2 weeks and really got blitzed by Mike Evans in week 1. Chris Godwin also had success. Last week, Malik Neighbors went off. You have Wan'Dale Robinson also scoring a touchdown. So this is a very weak part of the Commanders. They've improved in a lot of areas. This is a place where they got weakened. They lost Cameron Curl. They lost Kendall Fuller. And teams are just attacking them in the passing game and avoiding Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne and the big guys up front. But you still can run on them as well if you need to. So Dan Quinn so far trying to sort it out with this defense. It's going to be a work in progress with the pieces. So it's a team to attack. The Bengals should be aggressive passing. We'll see about T. Higgins. We won't get practice status until today and tomorrow because they're playing on Monday night. But without T. Higgins, it's been spreading it around a lot of people. Maybe it's easier to focus in on Ja'Marr Chase. Well, I think it's going to be hard for the Giants looking at the Commanders and Giants game, right? When we're looking at that they didn't cover anybody. Neighbors was the marked man, and he was getting targeted all over the field. So I look at that and say they're not going to be able to cover Ja'Marr Chase if they move him around. I mean, Neighbors is good, but he's a rookie. And Mike Evans is good, but he's kind of a vertical guy, right? Ja'Marr Chase can line up everywhere. He can explode everywhere. So I love him this week. That's why I put him at number 1. I think they're going to give him high volume and throw, get a lead with Joe Burrow. It's in prime time. I think Chase shows up.
Yeah, I mean, Neighbors, Evans, and Chris Godwin all had great fantasy games against them. And then not only did they all score at least 1 touchdown, they also allowed Jalen McMillan and Wan'Dale Robinson to score a touchdown. That's 5 receiving. That's 5 guys who scored a touchdown against the Commanders, 5 wide receivers over 2 games. Ja'Marr Chase should have a great game there. I also have Rashee Rice inside my top 5. You have him at 6, so we're both high on him. I mean, he's getting the targets, right? He seems to be Patrick Mahomes' top guy in this offense. And also this year, though, his yards per reception are up, right? First week, 14.7 yards per reception. Last week, 15 yards per reception, got that touchdown as well. It seems like Travis Kelce, who knows what's going on with him, but no Isaiah Pacheco. They should be passing a lot in this game against the Falcons. So he's easy to rank inside our top 5 this week.
Yeah, the Falcons have given up some to passing game so far. We've had George Pickens in their first game, and then Devonta Smith had a very solid game without A.J. Brown in week 2. Now, they're vulnerable. They're very good safeties. We've talked about it, Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons, so it's hard to maybe throw in that area of the field. So it could be actually kind of rough for Travis Kelce. I mean, Jesse Bates used to play in the AFC with the Bengals, so he's seen this offense before. So it seems like another Rashee Rice game, right? To get him involved all over. Xavier Worthy still getting his feet wet as a rookie, so he's going to make some big plays with the speed from time to time. But what a quick pivot on Rashee Rice, by the way. We went from, is he going to be suspended for a long period of time? Is he going to be unavailable? We're worried about Marquise Hollywood Brown. What happens at the same time? It almost happened to create this boom, right? Where Rashee Rice, no suspension. Marquise Brown has an injury. It goes from a short-term injury to a long-term injury. All of a sudden, it's all great for Rashee Rice, and Kelce slow down. So I think going forward, you got to look at Rice every week. And he could be a guy that you can trade now, too, because he's at his peak and maybe try to get some running back help. But heck, I would just play him and know that I've got a wide receiver 1 that I probably drafted as a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I mean, he's just one of those guys you're gonna keep plugging in, like you said, and that's the same with my wide receiver 5, Nico Collins. You have him a little bit lower, but at 13, he's an every week play. He's been so good to start this year. So until something changes, you keep playing Nico Collins. Same thing with Marvin Harrison Jr. Like after last week, you're not benching that guy. Great matchup against Detroit. I have him at 6. You have him at 7. Godwin has been fantastic. Keep plugging him in. But one guy I want to talk about is Brandon Aiyuk, who you have as your wide receiver 5 this week. I do have him at wide receiver 10, which is very high because he's done absolutely nothing, has about 70 receiving yards this year over 2 games combined, only 10 targets throughout those 2 games. But Deebo Samuel's hurt. Christian McCaffrey's hurt. They need him. And this Rams matchup is a great one where they just let Marvin Harrison go off last week. Jameson Williams went off against them in week 1. There's really no excuse for Brandon Aiyuk not to have a great week this week.
Yeah, and Brock Purdy should see less pressure come his way. I mean, 2 very tough matchups to begin the season, the Jets and the Vikings. I mean, that's going to really hurt any quarterback's chances to push the ball downfield. Now, you look at Aiyuk, yeah, there's no Deebo, so that helps. And how it helps in another way is that they don't have Deebo to support the running game with Christian McCaffrey out. So they will need to throw a little bit more, get those replacement touches for Samuel through the air. Now, you still see a heavy dose from Jordan Mason here on the ground because you can run on the Rams. We've seen it. They've given up some productive games to both the Cardinals and Lions to start the season, but very weak in coverage on the outside now. They're just falling apart, really. I think they have a safety hurt, so this is just not a very good spot here for the Rams. The 49ers are big favorites in this one, so I think they'll throw often to get the lead, then turn the ball over to Mason. And again, Aiyuk should make one of his patented big play touchdowns here because Purdy is going to have time to find him downfield off play action.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be talking about George Kittle, who we both have
Yeah.
as our tight end 1. Spoiler, but it has to go to Aiyuk and Kittle. The target should be going to them. Stop with the Juwan Jennings; he's fine, but he does not need as many targets as he gets. Stop with passing to the fullback. Like, stop getting cute. Pass to your best players. I think they'll have good games this week. Now, it was really, really, really hard to rank Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And I mean, when you see Tyreek Hill, he's normally 1 or 2 on this list. I have him at 8. You have him at 10, and then Jalen Waddle is further down our list here. I can't even find him on mine. You have him at 17. I apparently have him below 25, so we'll get to him later. But I mean, the matchup, I guess, isn't even the scariest part, right? Seahawks not a great matchup for wide receivers, but then also no Tua, Skylar Thompson. It's just so hard to trust him.
Yeah, I don't know what you're going to get, and I really am trying to get a read on the Seahawks defense as well. I'm really having trouble with the Seahawks overall. I mean, 1 week they were the running team, 1 week they're the passing team, 1 week their defense does this, 1 week their defense does that. So I don't know. They're 2-0. That's all I know. And Mike McDonald has been a pretty good coach right now, and they have made some improvements. They got Tyrell Dodson. Their corners are not bad. So what kind of game are you going to get from Skylar Thompson? I have no idea. Are they just going to make it a run-heavy attack and try to involve other people behind Devin Achane to try to win this game and try to attack the Seahawks? I mean, you did see the Patriots have a lot of success with Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson last week on this defense. So maybe that's the thing you can attack here. I would not be surprised if that's how they went. And if they do that, they'll probably have to get touches for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle on really short passes or get them involved in reverses or end around type plays, right, to use their speed to get them involved. So I just don't see a high rate of passing volume or passing success for Skylar Thompson, and that could really be hurting Tyreek Hill this week. And the secondary is very good. I mean, keep in mind, Devin Witherspoon is back there. So, again, long road trip with Skylar Thompson. I just can't see this materializing well, but you got to rank them that high potentially for their talent, and that's why they're up there.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill has played 70 or has run 78 routes with Skylar Thompson as the quarterback. targeted 20 times on those 78 routes, but just for 102 yards, 7.8 yards per reception. So completely opposite than when he's with Tua. I will say Jalen Waddle did catch 12 of his 15 targets from Skyler, a little bit more efficient at 10.9, still pretty low. But yeah, it's hard to trust.
You can see those extended handoffs to Waddle. Remember, like early in his career, he was averaging less than 10 yards per catch. So Waddle actually might be the beneficiary of this. And maybe you want to find him on the rankings and move him up a little bit. But I can't go nuts moving him up at all because, again, I don't have very high expectations for this offense overall. Tyreek is probably going to be hurt, but he's Tyreek. So he just needs one target, and he can make things happen. So let's hope for the best, but and let's also hope Tua returns here in week 4.
Now, Malik Neighbors, to finish off this first segment here, he gets the Browns, and he was fantastic last week. And he had 18 targets, though. He needed 18 targets for the 127 yards, 10 receptions, because Daniel Jones needs 18 targets to give Malik Neighbors a good game. This Browns defense at home can be pretty difficult. Last year, they did not allow a single wide receiver to have double-digit fantasy points in a game against them at home, which is crazy. Yeah. Brandon Aiyuk had the most points against them last year at 9.6. Now, I will say Brandon Cooks and CeeDee Lamb and Brian Thomas Jr. have both put up double-digit points against the Browns this year, but it hasn't been great. It's been 12 and a half points for Cooks. Lamb had 11 points on 10 targets. I am a little bit nervous about Neighbors this week, but we still have him as a very playable guy. We actually have him probably too high. Wide receiver 13 and 14.
Yeah, what's happening here with Neighbors and really Devin Singletary to an extent is these guys are just getting volume, because there's not much to trust behind either of these guys. Wanda Robinson's making a few plays, but we haven't seen Darius Slayton surface or any of these other guys really. Jalen Hyatt is probably wondering where he is at this point. So it's really all about Malik Neighbors and a few throws to tight end, a few throws to Singletary. That's it. So I think that volume is going to continue. What we need here is potential the Browns to get so far ahead where they don't really care what Neighbors is doing. And he just gets a ton of garbage time targets. And it's okay, you can do whatever you want. So I could see him doing a lot, like doing like 10 catches for like 95 yards or something. That could definitely happen in this game. So he's still playable, but it's going to be hard to smash it like he did last week.
Now, two guys I have ranked really high this week, and I want to get your opinion on it. It's Jameson Williams and Rashid Shaheed. We're going to hop into, some of these guys that are maybe be a little bit riskier, but I have ranked in my teens coming up right after a quick break.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by a new sponsor. Yes, I'm excited to introduce Arena Club. For most of us who like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a classic rookie card, Patrick Mahomes, Ellie De La Cruz, Luka Doncic, isn't in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. Thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of the retail price. Every card that I listed was hit from last week's Arena Club slab pack drop. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Yeah, it's really fun. Now, that's the excitement whenever you get some cards now, opening it up and just figuring out what's going to be in there, the mystery packs. It's just awesome, and you never know who you're going to get, and you saw those names that you can get in those slab packs. So check it out. Arena Club slab packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. After your pulls are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auction. The Arena Club grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent with a full grade rationale provided and explanation of how your card was scored. Whether you're buying, selling, trading, or displaying, Arena Club is the card collecting platform you need to check out. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL. It's arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL, code LockedOnNFL for 10% off your purchase. Check it out, arenaclub.com. All right, Michelle, it's time to continue the show, and we can talk about some guys that we're having maybe some tougher decisions on. Let's start with the two guys you mentioned, two big play threats that we thought were sleepers before the season, and are not sleepers anymore. They're like studs at this point, given their usage early in the season. So Jameson Williams, he goes on the road to face the Cardinals. Well, you have Rashid Shaheed, he goes on the road to face the Eagles. Break down these two big play threats.
Yeah, it's hard not to have them ranked high because they've been so good over the first 2 weeks. Now, Jameson Williams, we're not that far. We're actually not that far off of either of these
Yeah.
guys. I have Jameson Williams at 14. You have him ranked at 20. I have Rashid Shaheed at 18. You have him at 26. My thing with Jameson Williams is that he hasn't been on the field the first 2 years of his career, right? So that was always like he needs to get on the field to get targets. And all of a sudden, he's played 85% of the Lions snaps this year. Uh, it was 85%, sorry, in week 1 and then 91% in week 2. So even went up. He's getting 11 targets, 9 targets over the 2 games. He's making the big plays. Like I think he's now the number 2 target in this Lions offense instead of Sam LaPorta, which is really sad for us that sped up on Sam LaPorta this year. But I just think he's an every week play, especially in this nice matchup against the Cardinals. Rashid Shaheed is just a big play monster, and we can't depend on that every week. I'm not always going to have Shaheed high, but this is also a great matchup against the Eagles secondary that they look a little bit better this year, but still allowed a lot of big plays to the Packers. And we don't know what the Falcons offense is yet. So I not really going to take a lot from that. But then also their first round pick got hurt last game, right? So I just think this is too good of a matchup to sit a guy like Shaheed or not have him ranked as a top 20 guy when we know what a big play monster he is. I can see another big touchdown this week for him as well.
Yeah, Rashid Shaheed reminds me of a combination of 2 players, Jaden Reed and Darnell Mooney. What do those players have in common? They scored long touchdowns against this Eagles secondary and did it different ways. And we've seen it happen, but a lot of speed, right? And what they're doing that is different. Everyone's asking, what is gotten into Derek Carr? Well, Clint Kubiak is there, but I don't know why they didn't do this before. This was one of the least play action teams from last year, but now you have Alvin Kamara rolling. Play action is going to work downfield and stretch it down the middle of the field. So Rashid Shaheed has been pretty good. You mentioned James Williams cutting into Sam LaPorta a little bit in the name of Ross St. Brown. I think St. Brown will be okay. Yeah, we were counting on LaPorta to be right there, top to targets, not much to change, and Williams has really come on and really been strong. Well, I think it's going to factor into the Saints as well. Like we've seen Chris Olave been okay. He had a good game in week 2, not very good in week 1. And then you look at the tight ends. They were by committee with Foster Moreau and Juwan Johnson in week 1, but then it was a Rashid Shaheed show again in week 2. So look, it's going to come at the expense of someone, right? You can't feed everyone every game, but Shaheed is clearly involved. He had a good chemistry with Carr last year. He's not going away. He's a big play threat. That's why I have him a little down, right? He might be a little bit big play dependent. But heck, if this offense is going to run the ball like this, protect him, and be aggressive throwing the ball downfield, Shaheed's going to get a lot of opportunities. Again, the Eagles also give it up downfield. So I love it this week. Shaheed and Williams keep coming through.
I will say DJ Moore is a guy that we're actually agreeing on this week. I've had him ranked real low this year so far through 2 weeks. And this is one of the few things I feel like I've actually been right on. I'm just kidding. But DJ Moore, first 2 weeks, 7.5 points, 8.3 points. The first 2 weeks, Caleb Williams and him have not been able to find their connection. The reason I like him this week, I have him at wide receiver 15, you have him at 18, is because I expect the Bears better run, right? Just let Caleb Williams get comfortable back there, run it nonstop against this Colts defense. But that will allow some bigger plays for DJ Moore, just easier pass plays, right? For these two to connect deep down the field, some easier touchdowns, maybe even, right? Like we saw how many times the Texans ran against them in week 1. Stefon Diggs still scored twice. Nico Collins still had huge plays. I think that's what the type of week DJ Moore can have.
Yeah, I think the Colts defense just might be terrible all around and one of the best to attack in fantasy that isn't named the Rams at this point. I mean, they've been getting rolled over by the running game. They got a break last week, right, with the Packers, and that game plan was very run heavy. But we saw there that the Texans did whatever they want offensively against this team. So, look, you have DeVorce Buckner, you have Kenny Moore. There's not a lot on this defense that you say, okay, it's scary. So, you're right. I think DJ Moore, and I feel for this kid. I was watching the Sunday night game, and I'm like, DJ Moore is getting angry. Like he's saying, I'm open, I'm running past these guys. So the concept of DJ Moore has been great, but the execution depends on the front end of this and Caleb Williams hitting him on these routes and getting him uh, when he's wide open and stretching the field and being able to score, right? So I think it gets corrected this week. You're right. They should run the ball better. The question is it going to be DeAndre Swift or Khalil Herbert, or how do they do that? But they should run the ball better. He should have more time to throw downfield. They should be comfortable. They're in a dome. This could be a high-scoring game with Anthony Richardson on the other side, or at least push Caleb Williams to pass a little bit more. So I like DJ Moore. I'm going to call it. I think he scores a big play touchdown this week to get back on track. And again, everyone that's kind of dumping on Caleb Williams, look, it's been 2 games. The Titans defense has played pretty well. If you look at it now over the last 2 games, you look at the game, Texans on the road, very hard matchup, right? So this is not a hard matchup on the road. It's a short road trip. Colts stink. I think the Bears get going offensively this week.
Now, one guy I can't quit, and I'm not going to quit yet, is Amari Cooper. I still have him ranked as a top 20 guy. Wide receiver 19. He 2 points in both games this year. I don't know what to tell you, but he has 17 targets on the year, just 5 receptions for 27 yards. The connection has not been there, but they've been so close to him having huge games. He has the same amount of targets this year as CeeDee Lamb, who has 151 yards and a touchdown, more targets than Chris Godwin, who has 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, the points will come. It's against the Giants. I think he'll be fine. He's a fine play. I'm going to trust him for one more week. If he sucks this week, I'll finally give up on any hope. Moving on to the Texans, Tank Dell versus Stefon Diggs. You have Stefon Diggs ranked higher than Tank Dell. I have Tank Dell ranked higher than Diggs against the Vikings. Tank Dell's been also really bad for fantasy, right? But he's ran the same amount of routes as both Collins and Diggs. He has 11 targets, only 1 fewer than Diggs. They're just not connecting. Again, he has a 36 catch rate. There's been so many big plays to be had. It's not like Dell forgot how to play football all of a sudden. Like, they're going to connect. It's going to be fine. I'm going to keep trusting that Dell will come through.
Yeah, I actually don't like Dell this week, and here's why. There's a couple of factors. Number one is I look at this Vikings defense. Their pressure is going to come. It's on the road. I don't really like the Texans in general in this game because I think the pass rush can disrupt CJ Stroud a little bit. So I don't necessarily think it's going to be a high-scoring game because I think you'll have the Texans defense make some moves there against Sam Darnold. So this is a game that I want to fade. It looks like juicy on paper, right? But another reason is Stefon Diggs. He's going to be in Minnesota. He's going to ask the ball to come his way so many times. Like, that's the thing about Stefon Diggs. I think he becomes Pouty McPowderson if you don't give him the ball. And, like, he's going to go up to CJ Stroud in his face. You better throw me the ball 14 times in this game. It's in Minnesota. Like, he does that, right? I think that's what happened in Buffalo. Like, he's going to command targets because he's going to say, I'm going to command targets or I'm going to check out of this game, right? So they know that. He's going to be motivated in Minnesota. So they're going to make it a point to get him the ball a lot after Nico Collins. It's also a good matchup for Dalton Schultz, a little bit more shorter intermediate routes in the middle of the field versus Dell. So, again, I think this is a big Diggs game. I don't know if he'll totally go off. I mean, again, it's a tough defensive matchup, but I think he's going to find a way to make some plays back in Minnesota.
Very quickly, with like no analysis, let's give our answers for these 2 questions. Xavier Worthy versus the Falcons or Brian Thomas against the Bills? Who are you going with?
I'm going Xavier Worthy. I'm going to take a shot on him this week.
Yeah, the Bills defense is tough. I'm going to go Worthy as well. DeMarcus Robinson against the 49ers or Deontay Johnson against the Raiders now that he has Andy Dalton?
Okay, I'm going to add a third name. I think I actually like Adam Thielen better than Deontay Johnson because Dalton and Thielen had something going on last season. So I'm just going to say it's sneaky. Look at Adam Thielen ahead of Deontay Johnson potentially. So that tells me I'm going on the other side to DeMarcus Robinson.
I'm also going to Marcus Robinson. Also, a sneaky name is Tutu Atwell, who did really well without Cooper Kupp weeks 1 through 4 last year, and got on the field once Cooper Kupp was hurt last week. So Tutu is a sneaky playoff waivers if you're desperate for a play there. We're going to get into our tight end rankings for week 3 after we hear from one of our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel because it's America's #1 sportsbook. They have a little something different for you this time around. now through September 22nd, which we're getting really close to that date. So listen now, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. My dad actually just did this. He was thrilled. He's never experienced the Sunday Ticket experience. I've always been trying to talk him into it. And let me tell you, I think he's hooked, right? He enjoyed his Sunday so much last week, getting to watch all the games. But with a YouTube TV based plan, you'll get to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon on a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. If you want to hop on FanDuel for tonight's game and place that $5 bet, the Patriots and Jets game, I'm sorry, probably not going to be the most exciting, right? To make it more exciting, place down a little $5 bet. But I like the Patriots plus 6.5 points tonight. It's not necessarily that I think they'll win. I think it's going to be a close, gross game. The Patriots beat the Bengals. They brought Seattle to overtime. So I'm shocked they're getting 6.5 points. So I like that bet there. To place your NFL bets for tonight or for the weekend, just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. I mentioned earlier in this episode, George Kittle, our tight end 1. It's so easy. No Deebo Samuel equals a George Kittle monster game. In the 5 games that Samuel has missed since Brock Purdy became the starter, Kittle has scored 5 touchdowns, averaged over 92 receiving yards per game, and averaged over 20 fantasy points per game in those 5 games. Like, just no Deebo equals they go to George Kittle finally. I love him this week.
Yeah, I love him this week to the point is I would say this is your onslaught that you can look at. Last week we said Kyler Murray and Trey McBride and what Marvin Harrison Jr. could do. Now I think Brandon Aiyuk, George Kittle, and Purdy against this Rams defense. So really going back to the well on the Rams defense is what you want to do. Like Kittle is a field stretcher as well. So, and they're hurting. I think it's John Johnson 3 is the safety that's hurting for the Rams. So he's a decent player. So I think it's going to open up things in the middle of the field here for George Kittle. And when you look at him, he's a big play machine. And this is a time they need big plays with Brock Purdy and Aiyuk and Kittle. These are the big play guys. They need to roll them out. No Debo, Christian McCaffrey, none of this dink dunk short stuff. Let's get Brock Purdy back. He was the best deep thrower in the NFL last year. He's going to have time to burn the Rams. There's no Aaron Donald breathing down his face for a change. That's a very nice change for this 49ers offense. So throw it downfield, let it rip. I think the 49ers roll this week.
It turns out that Arthur Smith maybe wasn't the issue with Kyle Pitts and Drake London. And we don't really know what the issue is. But this week against the Chiefs, we both have Kyle Pitts still as a top 5 tight end play, despite his disappointing week 2. And really week 1, the only reason he wasn't disappointing is because he got into the end zone. But you have him as your tight end 2 this week. I understand because the Chiefs have been a great matchup for these slot type tight ends against Isaiah Likely and Mike Gesicki. But it is kind of hard to trust Kyle Pitts, but you gotta plug him in this week in a great matchup.
Yeah, I think Kyle Pitts is going to be the guy that comes through in the home games, and Drake London might be the guy who scores on a lot of the road games. So it's just a weird kind of thing that might be developing here. But Kirk Cousins inspired me with his play in the second half. It was not looking good early, but you got warmed up. You got Darnell Mooney in the end zone. I think that started to rev him up, right? When you got that big touchdown, they were struggling in the red zone to try to make little short passes happen. Then he hit that big one and said, okay, I feel back now. And then he hit the game winner to Drake London. He hit Kyle Pitts the week before for a touchdown. So I think this Falcons offense slowly coming together. I'm really excited about the volume because I think you can attack this Chiefs defense with what they can do. So I like Bijan Robinson in the passing game. I like Pitts. I mean, they've just been atrocious against the tight end early in the season. And I think that's just the design of their defense, where they have 3 safeties back. And this is what teams are doing. So when you have people playing and protecting against the big plays, against quarterbacks such as Cousins, right, who have a big arm, that's going to open up the middle of the field quite a bit. So I bet Steve Spagnuolo will be okay giving up the stuff to Kyle Pitts because it takes away the other stuff and the Chiefs can win a little bit easier overall.
Yeah, I do really like Kyle Pitts this week. Now, Trey McBride's going to stay my number 2. He's been the only tight end taken early in drafts this year that hasn't been a disappointment. He's been doing his thing. Brock Bowers, as a rookie, first 2 games, been great.
Yeah,
You keep plugging him in. He's our tight end 3 for both of us. I'll say Sam LaPorta, we still have him as a top 5 guy. Hopefully he is used more this week, but the Cardinals should be putting up points against Detroit. I know last week we thought it would be a high-scoring matchup against Detroit and the Buccaneers. It didn't really end up being, but hopefully this week we can get some high-scoring games here, especially Cardinals versus the Lions. It's just too early to give up on Sam LaPorta yet. Mark Andrews, I have him at 6, you have him at 7. But what about Travis Kelce and Dalton Kincaid? Because I have not brought up their names yet. And that's a hard pill to swallow. Kelce had 1 reception for 5 yards last week. Somehow it was worse than his week 1, where we thought it couldn't get worse with 3 receptions for 34. And then Kincaid, they manufactured some touches for him early in the game last week, but then he was not utilized. Now they were killing him, so I guess they didn't have to. He also only played 42% of the team snaps. Again, they were killing the Dolphins, so maybe they didn't need to use them. But who are you more worried about, Kelce or Kincaid?
I think I'm going to say for now I'm worried about Kelce because Kincaid, if you look at the numbers, he's still getting the key targets, right? Kelce has been like an afterthought in the game plan, and you also drafted him a little bit higher, right? You drafted him right up there with Sam LaPorta, where Sam LaPorta, you can see the path to getting back on track because the Lions are doing well. Eventually, when Williams does well to stretch a field, things are going to open up for LaPorta, and you just trust that. Weapon and Jared Goff will play better, but Patrick Mahomes, look, he's going to be a little bit up and down in some of these matchups, but I look at this again. I mentioned the safeties, very good safeties for the Falcons. So this is going to be a really tough spot. I mean, they're both pretty good in coverage as well. I mean, Simmons knows him well from the division as well as a former Bronco. So I look at it could be tough. And Patrick Mahomes is just going to go where the best matchup is. And again, we didn't see Rice being now the alpha, but he is. He's now become the number 1 target. If you look at all the metrics here. So Kelce is more of a supporting player. They're going to be slow with him. They know they just need him healthy for the playoffs. If they keep winning, they're not going to really change this too much with Kelce.
Yeah, and the same thing with the Bills. They look so good. Why change it up? But I mean, it's hard not to rank them inside the top 10 just because of tight ends are so gross, and it's probably hard not to play them. I mean, either of these guys could get a touchdown because they're on good offenses with good quarterbacks. They're good players, right? So you're pretty much playing them hoping for that touchdown or bust. Now, what about Isaiah Likely? Because everyone used up all their fab on him or used their priority waiver pickup, depending on what league format you're in. But he did nothing last week, right? And he played on fewer than 50% of the team snaps. He had only 3 targets, 2 receptions, 26 yards. Mm-hmm. You going back to Isaiah Likely against the Cowboys this week?
I think here's a sad thing. I think you have to because this landscape at tight end is pretty bad, right? We'll see about Jake Ferguson returning. I mean, he could. He had limited practice there with his knee injury, but we know Evan Ingram just got hurt on Sunday during warmups. David Njoku, who knows if he's going to be available. I mean, you just have to start stretching into like Pat Freiermuth and all these guys. And Taysom Hill's hurt, right? So we don't know if he's going to be out there as well to even use as a pivot play from like the traditional tight end. So a lot of people are hurting. So we got to play some guys that have produced early in the season. So I think that's why you have to look at Isaiah Likely and Kincaid and Kelce. There's just not a lot there that you can trust. You get really deep and you're really digging deep, and then you have to go like to the Hunter Henry range. How much do you trust him consistently to produce? So it's tough out there. And you have Dallas Goedert who's doing nothing. Dalton Schultz has been disappointing. So you can go down and down. So, but Isaiah Likely at least has done something big in the first 2 games that you can trust. So again, I think they'll use their tight ends quite a bit against the Cowboys this week.
Yeah. Let's say Jake Ferguson sits on the other side in this game. Would you rather go with Luke Schoonmaker, who got some targets last week, had an all right game, or Isaiah Likely?
That's a tough call. I think if I'm going for upside, I'll just make it simple like this. I'm going for ceiling. I'm going to Isaiah Likely because he can go off. If I'm going for, I want 6 catches or 60 yards or something like that, and that's could be my total production, all I'm looking for, that's what I would go with Schoonmaker because that's where I think he's at. I don't think he pays off unless he scores a touchdown, where I think Isaiah Likely could be very involved downfield.
Yeah, if you're going against a team that you're, projected to lose big time, you probably want to go with Likely. But if you're projected to win by a good amount, maybe just play it safe with Schoonmaker if Jake Ferguson is out. Absolutely. Now, rank these last 3 guys for me here to finish up our tight end rankings. Hunter Henry, who had a really big game last week with 109 yards on 12 targets. He gets the Jets tonight, so hopefully you're listening tonight or today. Mike Gesicki versus the Commanders, who also had a big game last week against the Chiefs. or Zach Ertz against the Bengals? Rank those three.
Yeah, I think Hunter Henry is the easy one here. I am right behind the starters I want to play, and then we're actually a little bit ahead of Isaac Likely this week, speaking of those two guys. So I like Hunter Henry. He's just too involved, and that's where you got to throw. You can't really throw on the Jets corners, so you got to throw there. Now, Zach Ertz, I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't want him to be involved, right? I want them to stretch the field and use their other guys. And Ben Sennett, I want to see him do something right. So I really don't love him, but I'm at 14. So I think he's playable if you're desperate and have all these other injuries. Now, I do not like Mike Gesicki's matchup. Actually, well, I do like his matchup. I just don't think they're going to need him as much, especially if T Higgins plays. I think you can use the wide receivers. If Jamar Chase goes off, they're not going to feed Gesicki the ball.
Could be
that
running
much.
a lot.
Yeah. So I don't, and he's not a blocker, so he's not going to be out there a lot. So I think the Bengals are kind of going to be an amoeba offense, like change based on their opponent as long as Higgins is out. And there's a chance Higgins returns, and then I'm not totally interested at all in Gesicki going forward.
What's hilarious is if you're on your ESPN app, it is going to say probably the Commanders are the number one team against tight ends because they've allowed one fantasy point to a tight end this year in half PPR. But like you got it. It's a small sample size. They played K. Dotton, Theo Johnson, Kokeif, like Payne Durham. Like they haven't faced a tight end. But I just thought that was funny. I wanted to bring that up. But Gesicki is playing on 35% of the Bengals snaps. So unless it's going to be a heavy pass game, I'm not going to want to count on him. And I think Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase will go off together. And then it's going to be a lot of running from Zach Moss. Get in your lineup.
Absolutely.
That is it for today's episode. Thank you to all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Everydayers, we'll be back tomorrow to close up the week, give you our Thursday night breakdown. Hopefully Aaron Rodgers can look a little bit better tonight. Target Garrett Wilson, please. Get him the ball down the field. Goodness. And then also give you our favorite DFS plays, sleeper plays, all that fun stuff. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.